Welcome to the Poetry of Predicament Podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This episode of the Poetry of Predicament, join us in welcoming our guest, environmental activist and valve turner, Michael Foster.
Actually, there's a group of youth who are organizing a national youth climate march for next summer. So I get to meet those folks online.
Great.
Yeah, should be nice.
All right.
And almost all of them are, high school age, first time organizing anything, and they want to do something really big. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
I'm just going to watch the magic happen, see if I can help.
Yeah. Well, how about if we just get going? Because our time is slipping away, and we want to get you to your next thing on time.
All right.
So let me just do a formal startup, and we'll just go.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament Podcast. And I am your host, Dean Walker, and I have the unbridled pleasure of having Michael Foster with us today. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask Michael to do a bit of introduction of himself. And I've just had the pleasure of meeting you, Michael, in a little regional conference for the Transformational Resilience folks here it was in Portland. And I'm very embarrassed to say that I hadn't heard your name before that, but your reputation really filled the room almost immediately. Once you'd spoken, there was this wave of whispering about who you were, what you were about, and what kind of heft you bring in terms of what you were talking about. So we'll get to that in just a moment. If I'm remembering right, we are at December 2nd in 2017. And so without further ado, Michael Foster, welcome to the Poetry of Predicament Podcast. Really a pleasure to have you here, pleasure to have met you. And I would love it if you would introduce yourself, tell us a bit, tell the listeners and viewers a bit about yourself and what brings you to the world of environmental activism.
So first thing to know is probably working backwards that I turned off the Keystone 1 pipeline a year ago because this is an emergency and what we're doing is illegal and immoral. And I came to that conclusion because of my work with the children who are suing the federal government and the state of Washington for a climate recovery plan. And I know the math and the science, and the time has run out. So every time we turn the ignition, every time we, burn the fuel, we are now more or less knowingly, most people still don't know, actually committing a crime. We can talk more about that kind of thing, but I helped organize youth in an organization called Plant for the Planet, which is an international network of young people, elementary and middle schoolers. They are working on planting 1 trillion trees worldwide. I helped get 350 Seattle off the ground. And right now I am at Wellspring Spa, a retreat center at the entrance to Mount Rainier near Seattle, Washington, where the 350 Seattle folks are having a leadership retreat. And I am no longer part of that leadership group. I am happily helping keep the kitchen going while they meet and plan, and I'm watching some amazing people come together and do things that I could not have dreamed of just 4 or 5 years ago. And so I'm in this beautiful rainforest, simplifying my life, getting ready for sentencing, which comes for me sometime early in 2018.
Mhm.
I was found guilty of some felonies and a trespass, so I will be sentenced in North Dakota for shutting off the pipeline in the next few months, and I'm just simplifying my life and finding that the more I get rid of and the less I do, the less money I have. It's actually true. The happier and more reasonable life becomes.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be here and talk with you.
Okay. Well, if I can just track back with what you just shared, if I'm remembering right, the kind of nickname for those of you who were involved with that direct action was valve turners.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would like to hear more about that, as much as you might like to share. And I think you may be surprised that this is a pretty accommodating audience for everything you've just said, including literally the crime that's involved with building more fossil fuels infrastructure, and the continued use of it, obviously far, far beyond overshoot and appropriate limits. So I don't know how often you get to be with audiences for whom that's really easy to hear.
Okay.
It sounds like more and more you are around audiences that's absolutely the reality that they truck in. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I also just want to reinforce a bit of what the viewers or listeners right now might have already picked up. There's in my experience of you, there's a authenticity and a depth and a clarity that that was just available and clear right away in meeting you, and again here when you're speaking. I find myself in a world where direct action activism of any kind is so rare. Even just having a straight conversation with people about what's going on the planet is so rare. But obviously the direct action or activism is rarer still. So I just want to thank you for the work that you've done, the stand you're obviously living and taking. And again, I'm just really, really pleased to have you here.
I gotta say, when you use the word work, it just doesn't fit. This feels like play. This feels like what you do with friends when you put together a camping trip or an outing or you plan a party together. It just doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
And especially Shut It Down today. The pipeline action was a small group of individuals. There was no group. There was no group. There was a conversation. One day, somebody I know and love and trust came up to me and said quietly, are you interested in having a conversation, being part of a conversation that could put you at risk of arrest? And I paused for half a second to look this person in the eyes, and say, yes, of course I am. Because yeah, if there is a crime being committed against an entire generation and all life to come, and our legal system is what got us here. Our legal system is what allowed us to do this. Everything that the pipelines and oil companies, the coal companies are doing, the government, everything is completely legal. It's permitted. Then yes, count me in. I want to have a conversation that puts me at risk of arrest. And so the conversation developed, and a few more people joined the conversation. Some people left the conversation. There was never any pressure on anybody to take part or do anything that they weren't completely comfortable with. Anytime anybody was uncomfortable with any aspect of what was going on or being discussed, we would just spend time with that until we either worked it out or found a way that everybody could work together, or the person would decide, then, if this is where the group is headed, then I'm done, and I'll support in other ways. Or so it was really a tiny group of people over a period of 4 or 5 months. And yeah, the word group doesn't fit. We were just people who knew each other talking. Zoom signal, a few emails, and the conversation got more and more interesting and more specific over time. And I think that was actually key. So if you have friends, if you know people that you love and trust who are of a similar mind, that's how you change the world. I don't think the big green groups with billions of donors can do the same kind of thing that a handful of friends can do. So check out shutitdown.today is the website for any and all updates on the trials, videos of the action, any talks we're giving. But know that it wasn't a group, it wasn't an organization. It was just a couple of people talking about it actually came out of the Break Free Pacific Northwest action, which was so big and beautiful and powerful, 3 days blockading the train tracks outside the Shell and Anacortes refineries. And during that time saying, this is so powerful, and this is not stopping the fuel. This is not stopping the poison. What else? What would be, what's the next step from here? Mm-hmm. And something that doesn't require thousands and thousands of dollars and hundreds and hundreds of hours of people organizing and working together and planning, and so yeah, mm-hmm. That's what that was about. And it's beautiful that it worked out so well. I was the other thing, kind of the mechanics of the pipeline shutdown, I was found not guilty of reckless endangerment by the people who live in the community. After the prosecutor compared me to the 9/11 hijackers, after he compared me to the Unabomber, and said that if the jury let me off the hook, that this would bring Sharia law to North Dakota, they found me not guilty of reckless endangerment because they saw the evidence that we took steps to make sure, according to the pipeline executive on the stand, that this was an unscheduled, controlled shutdown and there was no danger to the pipeline. In the next breath, he said that this was an incredibly dangerous, reckless thing to do. And the prosecutor talked about oil spills and leaks. But the video evidence they had of me describing what we were going to do on video the night before in the motel matched exactly what the pipeline executive described. So taking the time to make this a nonviolent, peaceful protest that did not put anybody or any community at risk, obviously mattered to the jury. And I think the other piece that was really powerful was that, I waited half an hour for arrest. I was 9 miles from Canada. And I waited for the sheriff to arrive so that we could not only tell this story, but so that we could challenge the system. I wanted my jurors to wrestle with what to do with this man who says he's here to protect our community, who says he's here to stop poisoning our children. And whether they agreed with me or not, I wanted them to struggle for a moment with what is the right thing to do. How should we then live? So I don't know if I was successful in the courtroom. I'm really disappointed with the fact that I wasn't allowed to bring witnesses.
Wow.
James Hansen was on the courthouse steps ready to testify. And Dr. Hansen is amazing on the stand, but we weren't allowed to talk about climate change.
So that really answers what was going to be my next question was, did you have any opportunity whatsoever to really bolster the case for what your motivation was?
The courtroom drama was really about whether or not I would take the stand and whether or not I would be allowed to say, this is all about climate change. And in the end, the prosecution did it for me. They showed 18 seconds of a video of me online saying, I turned off the Keystone pipeline and it felt so great. And this was what they used to end their prosecution of me, this little 18-second clip, which they had taken from a 6.5-minute clip of me talking about the deeper reasons. So the prosecution rested, and when the defense began the next morning, my attorney said, Your Honor, we'd like to review prosecution's evidence for the jury. Please play. And so they played the rest of the video. And for 6.5 minutes, the jurists got to hear me talking about why I did it and what it was like for me and what it meant for me, and how quickly we have to act now. 10% cuts per year if every person on earth does their fair share. So whoever you are listening, cut your emissions 10%. And if that means in December 2017, cut 10% in December 2017 and another 10% every year for the rest of your life. And plant our fair share of 1 trillion trees, because there's 3 trillion trees alive on Earth. That's 1 new tree for every 3 trees alive. It's 150 trees per person living. And it's 10 years worth of human pollution that we have to get back into the soil. And those 2 things are why humans are still here. We're here to cut emissions, to stop the machines that are poisoning our children, and to put the carbon back in the soil. And if we pull that off, we leave our kids with a planet that could sustain things that are alive today. And if we don't, that number goes up every year. So starting next year, you need to cut 11% if you didn't start this year. By 2025, we would need to cut 25% of our emissions worldwide every year. So this is really the last moment when it is physically possible. It's not politically possible anymore. No politician will touch this. Bill McKibben has refused. I shouldn't say refused. Bill McKibben has yet to write this math. I don't know why. I've asked him many times.
Mhm.
So it's not just the Democrats or the Republicans or the corporations. Even the big green groups are afraid to talk about how quickly people have to act. So when I say it's a crime, when I say it's illegal, it's not just immoral or bad for the planet. It really is, once you know where we're at, criminal. So anyway, I'm not sure how I got off on that, but that's what I was talking about in the video.
Yeah.
That became my defense. I didn't take the stand because they would have objected and cross-examined and kept me from speaking and tried to make me look like a terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
So I just let the video do the talking, and I sat quietly in the courtroom.
Well, I want to reassure you that the folks who are watching and listening to this and to you speaking are very much in your camp, as far as I know. It's a very sympathetic audience, small as it might be.
Well, and there might be some Fox News trolls or Heartland Institute folks, because I know that they're following me too. And welcome and good morning to everybody.
Okay. I'm curious. I've been recently creating a body of work with my very dear friend Carolyn Baker, who is easily the most prolific writer in terms of answering the question, who will we be together in the face of the shared predicaments we face? And a lot of the work that we're wanting to put together is to create safe environments for people to explore exactly these topics. I called my book recently The Impossible Conversation. And what I saw was, as soon as I got clear and vetted the notion of abrupt climate change heading our way with all due ferocity, and not to mention a number of other massively important metrics of our impact on the planet that have nothing to do necessarily with climate, I knew that this would be the impossible conversation. This would be what we would be unwilling and perhaps unable to speak about on any kind of scale. So that was the nature of my book, and I make my own attempts to bridge to what would be an appropriate way to build out our capacities and our skills in terms of how can we build ourselves into beings that have the ability, that have the capacity to take on this kind of conversation, the kind of questions you were just, rolling us through with what you were wanting to have presented in the courtroom and so on. I'm curious, can you say anything about how you communicate this topic with people on a one-to-one basis, or perhaps when you talk with small groups, or I don't know how often you do regular presentations, but particularly with conversations that are closer, people who are dear to you in your circles and so on, who might not be quite up to speed, who might not know nearly as much as you do about what's going on. How do you convey the heart of this? And how often is it received in a way that appears to shift people?
Several things run through my head. I think I keep one formula in mind, and that is for every shocking, grieving, doom thing that I share, I try to present some equal and opposite action that is a possible response at scale. So like I did just a little while ago, talking about the 10% per year. That's actually a shocker and an action. It does both. Because it tells you what to do. It's not saying, oh, you have to stop polluting. It's saying, cut your emission, do this, right? And the trillion trees, the same thing. Putting the pollution back in the ground, 10 years worth of pollution has to be reabsorbed. How do you do that? Well, 150 trees is a good start. So I do try and keep that kind of thing in mind. With people who are not up to speed, I try to start with something really general. I avoid going into 350 parts per million right away. If people have never heard of the organization 350, then chances are I'm not going to start there. But maybe just letting people know, we have been talking about this for over 30 years as a country, since it became an emergency that Congress was aware of. And we pollute so much more now than we did 30 years ago. So the people who are supposed to fix this and save us from ourselves or make us stop poisoning ourselves, they're not coming to our rescue.
Right.
It's us, it's you and me. So if it's going to happen, if we're going to leave anything living, it's going to be you and me. We are the ones that get to change. We are the ones that get to make life possible here. And people usually look at me and my lifestyle as a little freakish. Just, whether if it's people close to me and they know that I'm not eating meat or cheese or whatever, they know that I don't own a car right now. And I actually have a friend who has put together an electric motorcycle for me that is like a Franken-cycle. It was a Yamaha, and now it's got this big battery of batteries that just is ridiculous. But it's a conversation starter, right? Cyclists will stop me on the street to ask me about it. And so, there are people who know that I'm really out there and think that I'm really different. And I try to make sure that they understand that I'm just like they are. I grew up in Texas eating beef every meal for my entire life. I've eaten my fair share already. And I just try and find those things that we share in common, and a love for this place. Yeah. That the hour is late. One thing that I feel like everybody kind of agrees or feels is this factoid from I believe it was a World Wildlife Fund study that showed that there are less than half as many vertebrates living today as there were when I started grade school, 1970, the year of the first Earth Day, the beginning of the modern environmental movement. Mm-hmm. And that by 2020, there will be 1/3 as many alive, so that every time I look at an animal, I'm so grateful that they're still here, that critter is still running around, and I'm aware that there would have been 3 of them.
Right.
So just taking a moment with that and saying, we can argue and we can politicize and we can, defend our way of life and our pollution and our tailpipes, but not for long.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in small conversations with people close to me, usually people who are really close to me have heard all this, but I try to keep it less sciencey and more about wanting less.
Wanting less sounds very clear, given what you were just saying. And I would just say the other part that you just shared a little differently, that what Carolyn and I are trying to offer folks is the safe ability to conjure up a set of practices. People can create practices for themselves, each of them designed to do some amount of reconnecting with our deeper selves, reconnecting with each other, and then reconnecting with the earth. And the only way I know to do that with any kind of sincerity, with any kind of heft that will stick, is to find what people love, is to go in through that part of the conversation. And so to perhaps bring to this imaginary conversation you and I are talking about having with someone near to us and saying, asking them in real warmth and real curiosity, what do you love about this life? What do you love on this planet? I myself am an ocean person. It's where I've always gone to recharge my batteries and feel more alive. Do you have something like that you connect with on the planet? And then off we go.
And not as a gotcha, not as a trap to say, oh, you care about oceans, so if you care about the ocean, then now you have to protect the climate, right? Now you have to agree with me. But yeah, to really let people feel it and join them in that love and appreciation.
Exactly.
And help expand that awareness, letting people talk about the thing they love, the things they love that are worth protecting. What is it that's worth protecting? How can we do that? How do you do that? What is it that you do that you feel like makes a difference? Because we're going to need to do more. Whatever it is you're doing, we're going to need to do it times 10, times 100, times 1,000.
Yeah.
That's the truth. We're nowhere near.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I come back to this idea of climate recovery with people. That we live in a moment where the changes we make today matter. The changes we make, the same changes a few years from now, not so much. In a few years, you could make the same radical lifestyle change, and thousands of species that you might have protected today will not make it.
Yeah.
James Hansen did a quick calculation in preparation for my defense on the stand. He was going to share how many hundreds of species will be wiped out if the Keystone 1 pipeline continues to operate as permitted. Just that one pipeline. We shut off 5 pipelines that bring all the tar sands oil across the Canadian border into the US. That one pipeline is going to be responsible for hundreds of species becoming extinct. It's flowing right now. I stopped it for 8 hours. So the actions we take today count. Waiting is not doing anybody any good. We have an opportunity for recovery, but it's a very time-limited offer. And that urgency keeps me going and helps me focus myself on wanting less right now. So speaking of practices, this is a personal one. I didn't mean to do this, but I've caught myself doing it more and more over the years. I'll go into the grocery store to get something, and maybe I'm just hungry, maybe I'm wanting a snack, maybe, I don't know, but I got to get something at the grocery store. And I end up going through every aisle and looking at so many products products that I either like or used to like, and wanting, and end up coming out empty-handed and relieved. There's a weird sense of relief after 20 or 30 minutes wandering the aisles and coming out maybe with one item, maybe with no items. And having looked at the packaging and looked at the plastic and looked at the ingredients on, a few dozen things, and realizing the more I do that weird, it's not an intentional thing, but the more I end up doing that, realizing there's nothing there. There's no life in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's less and less life in the grocery store. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a weird kind of walking meditation. And I suppose it's probably helped me a lot without me intentionally ever setting out to do it, to really appreciate and enjoy the feeling of coming out empty-handed and full-hearted.
Just gorgeous. Thank you. Michael, I'm curious, is there do you have any desire for folks who might eventually listen to or see this podcast? Is there a way that people can sort of keep up with where you are and how things are going? Is there going to be any way to stay in touch with you once you're sentenced and so on? Because I know I would love to stay in touch. I would love to stay connected just with your energy, if nothing else. It's, so extraordinary to kind of be in your slipstream in this, in these actions, and in your remarkable, way of being in all this. So how can people stay connected? Will they be able to with you? And is there any way that we could be of service if you would like people to, connect up with a particular website or a group, or is there any way we can support from over here toward your direction?
Number one, people need to connect with their local 350 chapters. I think that's probably the most likely group wherever you are to get some energy going, and work on this climate recovery thing personally, socially, the conversations with loved ones, professionally. Imagine whatever job you're doing, whatever you're doing to turn stuff into money to feed yourself or your kids. Imagine how that job will be done 40 years from now, when there is no carbon footprint, when people are living without emissions, and not a technological, science fiction skyvac kind of fix. Do your job net zero. And if nobody at your work or corporation or whatever you're doing can figure that out, that's your riddle, that's your puzzle, is how to live on this place and make a living if you must, without destroying what's alive. I gave up. I'm trying not to make a living. I'm trying to make things live. And living on less is really the easiest way to solve that for me, because I'm not that bright, I guess. But the way to do it professionally, the way to do it personally and socially, and then the political thing too, 10% less each year this year. That number's going up every year. And that is the number one thing people can do. If I get locked up, I might face 21 years, but that's really only if they're trying to fill Charles Manson's cot. And 10 years is the max for any single charge. And since I'm an old guy with no priors and I'm really not a danger to my community, according to the jury, then Probably 5 years would be the judge trying to make an example of me. Now here I am out in public talking about what I imagine the judge might do to me. I have no idea. The judge has never seen a case like this, and she never will again, unless somebody goes and turns off the valve one more time. So I might get community service. I might be sentenced to 5 years of planting trees, in which case I'll be happy to hear from folks. The best way to stay in touch is on shutitdown.today or through there. I have another website that I've been connected with, but other folks are taking over my work, which was through Climate Change for Families. Climate Change for Families is just meant to be a clearinghouse for young people and families to amplify their efforts and voices. It's just a mom and pop site. There's nothing much going on there. If teenagers have stuff they want to publish or put out, that's a great place to do it. And I'm really grateful for everybody's support. I hope that mostly people will use what I've done as a way to think how to think big, how to think at scale, how to think like if one person could just do something crazy big and inspire other people to do that thing. The 1 trillion trees, the kids came up with the 1 trillion trees, right?
Yeah.
That's where it's at. That's where it's at.
Yeah.
So thank you for the time here, Dean, and thank you for the impossible conversation, because until we can talk about what we're doing, people have such a hard time imagining that it's happening. Number one, it's hard to wrap our brains around that this is real. And number two, that we are the ones doing it, that we're the ones pulling the trigger every day. And then to imagine living our lives differently so that we could live without pulling the trigger, which of course we did for thousands of years. Yeah. So it's a seemingly impossible conversation, but doing the impossible is why we're still here.
Yeah.
What greater joy could there be?
Michael Foster, thank you so much for who you are and your beingness, your presence. My warmest blessings and wishes to the continuity, to the continuing grace that seems to just flood out of you. Thank you so much for who you are, for spending time with us today. And I will keep my little fingers and toes crossed for the judge giving you just public service or whatever the options are that allow you to keep connecting with us. And it's sometime in the spring of 2018.
Probably winter, probably January, February, and whatever happens, if I end up in jail, if I don't, we win. 2 quotes. One is Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And then the other quote is from Joanna Macy, because you said the word grace. Grace is what happens when we heal the world together. So I encourage everybody to find the folks in your community who will make grace with you. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Dean.
Thank you so much, Michael. You take good care of yourself, and we look forward to hearing good things about you being out in the world in your gorgeous way in 2018. Thank you, brother.
All righty. Thank you. We'll talk again.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament Podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.org. lifeboat.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. You may want to check out our sister podcasts, the new Lifeboat Hour with Carolyn Baker on Podbean and at carolynbaker.net. Also, the Impossible Conversation podcast, another channel on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us. Join us again later for another episode of the Poetry of Predicament.